So I got to start with you, Governor. If you were coaching Kamala Harris and said, here's what you might not expect from Donald Trump, or you don't see when you watch it on TV, is there something people should know about what it's like to be on that stage against him?
Yeah, you go on that stage. Look, she has a tremendous opportunity to really make a difference in terms of where this race is going. If she can, number one, explain to people really who she is, what her policies are, and this is a little tricky part, to be also separate herself from Joe Biden. You know, Trump's going to be saying all the time that, you know, you were with Biden here, you were with Biden there. I think she needs to be able to say, look, you're not debating Joe Biden. I'm Kamala Harris, and I've got my own ideas. And I think if she can show a sense of gravity, a sense of real strength, and getting into some kind of a back and forth with Donald Trump is, frankly, I think, a waste of time and a waste of the precious minutes she's going to have to communicate to the American people. For Trump, if he goes off and starts, you know, attacking her, and I think it's a real loser. And I think his position should be he's going to defend his record, say his economic program was better than Joe Biden's, and ask her about her flip-flops. You know, who is the real Kamala Harris? What do you really believe? But I think for her, there's so much to gain and such an opportunity to have a major impact on this race. And probably, if she does well, this would probably be the last debate. So watch it this time, because it's like Haley's Comet. It's probably not coming back for a long time.
So, Jess, I'm wondering, because I think he used a couple of words that are important: gravity, strength. I would add to that intellect, smarts, right? I want my president to be a lot smarter than I am. I certainly want them to have a certain level of gravitas and strength. But do they judge women still differently on a debate stage than they judge men?
Well, certainly. I mean, we've seen that for sure. We're gonna judge women differently, and that's going to continue to be the case. But I think that what this debate is going to show us, there's a couple of things. Donald Trump remains Donald Trump. He wants to be the center of attention. He's a classic bully. He's going to come in insecure and probably a little bit unprepared on some of these issues. We've seen some incoherence on some of the issues that he's been asked about in this last week. And I think, you know, he's not going to get away with some of the things he's gotten away with in the past, because he's going up against someone who's going to hold him a little bit accountable to some of these things. We've learned a lot in the last few years in dealing with Donald Trump. And I think Kamala Harris, as a prosecutor, she's going to make the case. And I think she has an opportunity to show her command of the issues. She has an opportunity to show a contrast, a clear contrast that isn't hypothetical anymore. And I think we're going to see something that looks very different than what we've seen in the past.
I think, Chuck, that the governor said something else that's really important. Every minute counts. She's going to have a limited amount of time to try to do a lot of stuff.
Right.
What should be at the top of that list?
Well, I want to sort of emphasize what the governor was saying there, because I expect this debate to be asymmetrical in how it looks, I think, to the average viewer. And here's why: because I do think both of them have different pieces of the electorate they have to talk to. I agree with Governor Kasich about what the vice president needs to do, right? She needs to establish her own identity a little bit, find some distance. So it's a separate conversation. She needs to talk to some voters who may not agree with some of her ideas, and she needs to figure out a way to reassure those voters that, hey, they have a voice in her administration without looking like she's trying to overly placate them and cause problems on her base. What she's got to be careful of is that Donald Trump is trying to get a different voter, right? He's trying to talk to voters who aren't always engaged. He's trying to talk to voters that he thinks already agree with sort of his MAGA populism. And so I think the danger here for the vice president is wanting to engage on the issues or on the specifics that the former president is going to want to engage in, because he's trying to talk to different voters than she is. This is such an unusual general election debate, and normally, you know, you go back to our pre-Trump era politics. Romney and Obama were actually talking to the same group of voters in their debates, because they were the ones that were up for grabs. There's such a weird grouping of these two coalitions. Their theories of how they win this election are different. So I think that's where it's going to take real discipline for the vice president to sort of stick to her plan, regardless of whatever Donald Trump is doing. She has to put on blinders, the way they do that with horse racing, where you don't see your participant. She can't get caught up too much in what he's saying.
Yeah, I think, Jess, the Times notes that Harris has, at least in the plan, ditched the strategy that Hillary Clinton had of denouncing Trump as a racist or a misogynist, because her aides believe it's a waste of time to tell people what a terrible person he is. Most people have already made a decision, right? If he's a terrible guy or he's their savior. And yet you do see figures like Congresswoman Liz Cheney calling Donald Trump and J.D. Vance misogynistic pigs. That's a direct quote from her interview when she announced that she was going to be endorsing, her dad was going to be endorsing. How much do you think Harris should lean into the Trump-Vance view of women beyond abortion, beyond going into their health care and their decisions in their bedrooms?
Look, women tend to decide elections in this country, and I think there's some opportunities for the vice president as she goes into this debate. Right now, there's an opportunity, I think, with young women to speak to young women and to engage them in a way that they haven't yet been engaged. Just over 50% still haven't registered to vote. And there's an opportunity with women under 30 to have a conversation with them and to draw contrast and to draw them into their future. And I think that's why you're seeing a campaign that's trying to be future oriented. I think we've also seen a swing with white women. In the pre-convention era, Donald Trump had a lead there. Now it's pretty much a dead heat. So she's closing the gap with white women. There are different people. Chuck's right. There are different people that she should be talking to and will be talking to. I don't think she needs to resort to definitions and calling things out. I think what she's going to do is talk about the policies and how it impacts people and how it impacts not just women, but working families and middle-income Americans, because that's what it is. And that's why you see her talking right now about an opportunity economy that deals with childcare. Donald Trump didn't have a coherent answer on that this week. Things like housing, things like grocery prices. She understands she's got to meet people on the economy and on economic issues. And I think we're going to hear about that. And those contrasts are pretty far and wide.
So there is substance, and as you know, Governor, there is also perceptions. We can all remember the sweating by Richard Nixon, and we could go on and on, checking your watch like you're bored being at the debate, so on and so forth. I happen to be in Ohio over the weekend at a large gathering where, as I often am, I was surprised by the perceptions, the questions I was getting. I want to ask you about after your presidential debate and people's perceptions versus what your perception was. And I ask it in this context that over the weekend, we saw Trump claim that no boxes or artificial lifts would be allowed on stage, that would be cheating. How much do you think, and in your experience, does the visual representation, how you look, how you stand, how you present yourself, anything that you might betray emotions with on your face play in? Yeah. And how you felt you did versus other people?
It's a really good question. I mean, first of all, I had to find the cameras. You got so many cameras in the room and you got all the people out there. So first of all, you have to find a camera. And then the second thing, which was hard for me, Chuck will agree with this, is you got to know when to say what you have to say and shut up. Don't step on your own lines. And so communicate what you want to say. And if you do it effectively, then you'll get the applause, or you'll get people. In this case, it won't be applause, but you'll get the fact that people will assent what you have to say. But there's one other thing we haven't touched on here that I'm sure would come up before we finish, and that is her message is, hey, you want a generational change? You want to turn the page? I mean, part of it is, this is really something interesting. She could, there's possibility exists, I'm not saying it will, possibility exists that Donald Trump turns into Joe Biden. He's the old guy, right? And she's the young next generation. I think her pitch about the fact that you were all frustrated in this country, you didn't have a choice, now you do. And you have a choice of one generation versus the other, and this is what I'm going to do. I think that would be effective and interesting, and she's going to look the part. She doesn't have to act to look the part. She is younger than Donald Trump.
Yeah, she's younger, obviously, than Donald Trump, but I think energy-wise, Donald Trump can often match pretty much anybody, at least in terms of Chuck, the way he puts his message out there. What do you think could make or break it for him? We've talked a lot about what Kamala Harris has to do. A lot of people think this is her chance to introduce, and it is, right? Because we know the polls show a lot of people don't know what she stands for, so this is critically important. But what's the biggest pitfall for Donald Trump?
Well, I think it goes to something that Governor Kasich said at the very beginning of our segment here, hinting that he could really lose in this debate. Right. I don't know what a win for him looks like that he can orchestrate other than having his opponent, like what happened the last time, because he didn't perform very well in the last debate. Right. It's just that nobody noticed that he didn't really have some coherent answers of his own, really didn't notice some of the weird grievances he went down. I mean, my own son went on his TikTok feed and he goes, "Did Donald Trump talk about sleeping with a porn star during the first debate?" That is what broke through his TikTok feed, okay? He's a 17-year-old, so you can judge all you want there on that. But the point being is, Donald Trump really wasn't very good at this. And if he goes after her in the ways he went after Hillary Clinton, and I'll tell you, Hillary Clinton, look, she was a very polarizing figure in 2016. And in some ways, the public, why they did, I don't know, sort of accepted his harsh attacks on her in a way that I don't think he uses those same techniques on Kamala Harris. I think they're likely to boomerang badly in his direction. So that's what I think. His inability to not go on the attack in a personal way against her, his inability to sort of restrain himself on those things is what I think is his biggest risk here, which is where, look, I'm going to assume there is a second debate, but if there's not, it'll be because he couldn't help himself on the personal.